All right, everybody is here, hopefully awake after that wonderful lunch. And my goal today is to talk to you about the what, the why, and the how of this DIY closed looping thing. Because I've gotten a lot of questions in the morning, which has been absolutely fantastic, about why are patients doing this? Isn't there something commercially available? And so what I want to explain is how this story started almost 5 years ago. But I want to contextualize first this major problem. Diabetes is hard, and I don't think we talk about this enough. Because when we're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, we're told it's okay. You have insulin, you take your insulin, count your carbs, measure your blood sugar, and it'll be okay. And that's a good enough start. But we don't spend enough time talking about the fact that there's so many other things that go into impacting your blood sugar. Food is one thing that impacts it, yes, and insulin. But what about hormones, and sickness, and stress, and jet lag? And that's why our graphs look like this. And we also don't talk about the fact that insulin is not instantaneous. If we inject it, or give a bolus on our pump, it's not a miracle drug. It doesn't work right then, or in the next 5 minutes. The peak time is an hour to an hour and a half, and has a life in our body for many, many hours. So we're basically playing catch up, because the food we're eating is going to hit in about 15 minutes. The insulin doesn't really peak for another hour in most cases. So most of the time we're playing catch up, and we don't talk about all these variables, and also the ones that we can't measure. What do? You just say, it's diabetes. Why am I high? Why am I low? It's diabetes, because there's all these reasons that are really hard to figure out. So I got really frustrated about 5 years ago, because I was lucky enough to be able to access insulin, which not everybody can worldwide. But I was also given tools that I were told were the gold standard, an insulin pump and a CGM. And I was really frustrated because I am the world's best sleeper. I wear that title and that crown. I will sleep through anything. And so my CGM alarm that was supposed to wake me up if my blood sugar was dangerously low, it could be buzzing itself off the nightstand onto the floor, and I would still not wake up. And so people said, why don't you put it in a jar with change on the bedside table? That wakes me up. Okay, I'll try that. Tried it, didn't work. Earthquake alarm, didn't work. The only thing that I found to wake me up was this. This is my 3-year-old niece, Carolyn. And when Aunt Dana comes to visit, even though Aunt Dana's from a different time zone, 2 time zones away, she doesn't understand that. When she gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning, she wants Aunt Dana to come out and play. And this is a picture my mom actually took of her running down the hall and banging on the door saying, Aunt Dana, wake up, it's time to play. Aunt Dana, wake up. This woke me up. But my niece doesn't live with me, and it's really hard to bottle that level of noise and put it back in my FDA-approved medical device. And so this is why I was so incredibly frustrated, because in addition to the inability to hear the CGM alarm, I couldn't get my data from it. So when my healthcare provider in 2013 asked me for a week's worth of data, at the time I said yes, no problem. But then 3 months later when I went to gather my data, I was like, well, how do I do this? Because the FDA-approved software for my glucose monitor for the device in my pocket only worked on a PC. And I had a Mac. How was I supposed to get my data? Well, I pull the device out of my pocket every day, go to the 24-hour screen, pull my phone out, take a picture, email it to myself, copy and paste it into Excel, print it out, and this is what I handed my doctor. And this is the sad reality of data in diabetes and interoperability, is the fact that doctors accept this. This is the gold standard of looking at diabetes data, which is incredibly frustrating. Not only because of the fact that you can't hear the alarms and you can't get your data, is that this is a picture of me trying my absolute best. I had a pump, I had a CGM, I'm educated, I had insulin, and all day, every day, up, down, up, down, up, down. I had about 50% time in range. And so I did what any good patient would do. I called the manufacturer, right? It's their device, it's their problem. Hey, manufacturer, can you make a louder alarm? And I was told everything from, it's loud enough for most people, this is just your problem, to, we're working on it. It'll be out in our next version. You can guess how quickly that version came out. In fact, it was almost 6 years before this same company released a software update. It's not come out to the hardware version. It was absolutely incredibly frustrating. But I finally said, okay, I can't change this device, but what if I could add new tools to it? I know I can use my phone to make all kinds of alarms, right? So what if I could get the data off my device, send it to the cloud, down to my phone, and do whatever I want with it? That sounds great, right? It's super easy. But oh wait, do you remember how hard it was to get my data off my device retrospectively? There was no share service, there was no Night Scout, there was no anything. And so what on earth was I supposed to do? And this is where I was introduced to open source. Through social media, I saw a tweet from a gentleman named John Kostick. And he had the same frustration with getting data off the glucose receiver. In his case, it was for his son with type 1 diabetes. And so he posted a picture on Twitter showing how he had plugged the receiver into the computer, reverse engineered the driver software that allowed him to pull the glucose data off every 5 minutes, send it to the cloud where he could view it across town from his son. And I was mesmerized because the light bulb went off and I said, ooh, if only I could get the data off, I could build that wonderful, loud, obnoxious alarm system that I've always dreamed of, ironically. So that's what happened. I reached out to John and said, would you share your code with us? Because I want to do this thing. And he said, sure. Open source is where you openly share with other people. And as a non-engineer, I come from a communications background. This idea of sharing programming and sharing code was completely new to me. But the idea of sharing knowledge across the diabetes community, well, I've had diabetes for 10 years and been online, that's old hat, so it made perfect sense to me. And what we were able to do is take the data, upload it to the cloud, send it to my phone, and make the loud, obnoxious alarm that woke me up. Great. But I realized there was still a slight chance that I might still sleep through 800 alarms on my phone. So we made this really simple, ugly, but highly effective webpage, because it worked even at 3 a.m. if my blood sugar was low, where my loved ones could see my data and see what was going on. Again, this was pre-Night Scout, pre any share services and things like that back in 2013. And what we also did was build a tiered alarm system, so that if I did not wake up to my alarm, it would then alert my then boyfriend, now husband, who lived 20 miles away at the time, my family who lived across the country, and they would be able to pick up the phone and call and check on me, etc. But in order for them to feel kind of confident what I was doing, we added these buttons to the system. So if I did wake up and take action, I would hit snooze and say, don't alarm anybody else needs to be woken up. If I didn't wake up and press the button, it would then alarm them. But because I was pressing the buttons, they said, why don't you input what you're doing? So if you're low, we know that you've taken carbs, things like that. I said, okay. So we added buttons for carbs and insulin and less insulin. And as a well-trained guinea pig, I would wake up, take action, press the button, and they would be able to see what I was doing. Now, because I was entering this data, we went, hey, we've got the real-time blood glucose information. We know the insulin activity curves because they're published online. What if we put that together with the data I'm entering? We could actually predict into the future what's going to happen. So instead of being reliant on our imagination of what happens at the end of our glucose monitor screen, will I go up, will I go down, will I go up and down? We actually had the computer predict out every 5 minutes what was going to happen. And this enabled us to have a predictive curve and a predictive alert. So if the system knew that, hey, your blood sugar is trending low, you're going to be low in 74 minutes, but you could eat 3 carbs and not go low. And so that's what we built. It's essentially an open loop system because it takes in the glucose data, insulin dosing data, food, anything else I tell it with the glucose information, maps it in the future and tells me, hey, if you're going to be in or out of range. It worked really, really well. And then a little bit later, we actually realized we had all the components to close the loop itself. It was fairly easy because you could take the same pump and CGM that I already had, and you add a small computer and a radio device and a battery to power it, and the computer could read between the CGM and the pump. So instead of me having to input data from the pump would talk directly to the computer and get this information. And the difference is really startling for manual diabetes. I know I've talked with tons of people here, and basically for my entire life with diabetes. It's interesting how many people think an insulin pump already does the automated closed loop stuff, but it doesn't. You're still in manual diabetes mode where you, as the human, are in the center of the system. You have to look at the CGM, you have to look at your pump, your IOB, think about what's going to happen, add any food information, and do it. And then do it 5 minutes later or an hour later and over and over and over again. But the beautiful thing about automated diabetes is you put a computer in the middle, and it can read data from the CGM, it can read data from the pump, it can do math about what is needed, give more or less insulin, and do it over and over again. The human can still pay attention, the human can still do whatever they want, but if the human is busy, sleeping, for example, or working or paying attention in a room, and you're getting really, really excited and your blood sugar is going up, the computer can look at that and say, whoa, something is going on. Maybe it's the tail end of a meal, maybe it's excitement and adrenaline and jet lag. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It can start adjusting insulin delivery accordingly. And so that's what became this system, which is on screen and what I wear today. That's my open APS rig. If you ever notice a glowing light, this is what mine looks like here. And on the right, you can see the Night Scout graph, and you can see the blue insulin delivery is going up and down in response to my blood sugars. And it's sometimes interesting, even with a relatively flat blood sugar line, you may need more or less insulin. And that's not just in response to a single data point, but it's looking at the trend of where have you been and where are you predicted to go. And that's the beautiful thing about a closed loop system, because it can help you go from something like this, up, down, all the time, and feeling miserable in between, to within the first week of closing the loop for myself, this is what my graphs look like. Every single night, I would wake up to this, and it still gives me chills when I think about it, about the difference between what my life with diabetes was like 5 years ago, where I was afraid every night to go to sleep because I was an adult, and I lived by myself, and my diabetes was on me. And I would close my eyes and grit my teeth and cross my fingers and think, okay, it's gonna be okay, you've got the CGM, it'll be okay, you'll wake up in the morning. And especially when I traveled, especially in, abroad with different time zones and everything, it made me really nervous. But I've been in Europe for a week, I was in Copenhagen, I got here last night, I went to bed, I didn't once, for a single second, worry about my blood sugar. And so the piece of this mind system is exactly why we decided to open source it. And that's where OpenAPS came from. It came from the motivation to want to make safe and effective basic artificial pancreas technology widely available to anybody who wants it, knowing that we have spent so much time building this algorithm and designing the system for safety. Because honestly, we know the system will fail. All diabetes tools will fail. Your pump site will fall out, your cat will chew the tubing, your CGM will fall out, you'll go underwater and the sensor won't be able to read. There's numerous reasons why it won't work. Or for example, you're sitting in a room with 250 other people with Bluetooth going. I've seen a number of pictures tweeting about the Bluetooth connectivity. So the way we designed OpenAPS and the other DIY closed loop systems is to send a short temporary basal rate command with the idea of calculate it so if it's the last rate it ever sends, it falls back to the gold standard of care pump operations. So again, sends a command. Ideally, if it's working, you've got full communications and everything, the next 5 minutes, it predicts something different, it sends another command, but worst case scenario, you fall back to your standard pumping, and we understand that all these things will happen, which is why we actually designed for them. And the nice thing too is, it's all open source. You can read every line of code of every version that we've ever published. And what we also did was post a plain language reference design. So if you want to look for somewhere to start, go to openaps.org. It's got frequently asked questions. It's got the reference design that talks about safety and points out this is not a cure. You have to have a well-functioning, calibrated CGM. You have to have a pump that works. You want to start with the basics so that when you add the computer in, what it's doing is it's making math decisions off of your existing settings. And it's saying give more or less compared to your settings. And so you want to make sure that you kind of understand your pump and your CGM before you add this on, and this is true of any DIY or commercial system. Now, when I started this, I thought maybe if 1 or 2 other people might want to do this, it would be worth sharing in the effort to make it shareable with the world. And so we shared it in February of 2015, that's when OpenAPS launched. And I have been absolutely blown away with how many people worldwide have told us that we're looping. At a really conservative estimate, at my last count, I estimate there's over 1,300 people looping, and I know it's actually more than that. But what's also significant is that in the last 4.5 years since we kind of launched OpenAPS and other DIY systems have come into existence, I do a rough calculation to estimate how many hours of experience do we have with this technology in the real world. I estimate that's over 11 million hours of experience. And that's significant when you want to contextualize it with a lot of the safety studies that are done for regulatory approval. Those things are often submitted to regulatory bodies with about 150 or a couple 100,000 hours of experience. So I think it's significant when you look at the number of hours of experience, because when people go on these systems, are they perfect? No. Do they cure your diabetes? No. But for some people, it's about the quality of life and being able to go to sleep at night and feeling safe. For other people, it's about better clinical outcomes. We've had a number of retrospective as well as observational studies, and some of these are in the graphs here. There's a bunch of published literature in peer-reviewed journals that looks at people who chose to start using a DIY closed-loop system. All the studies so far, time and range went up. A1C went down. And the average looper population might have a slightly lower average starting A1C, but that's not to say that people don't still see benefits. Whether you start with an A1C of 7, or you start with an A1C of 10 or above, people are seeing improvements, as well as reducing the time spent high and low. And one of my favorite examples of quality of life, again, my story is all about sleep, but Jason Whitmer is a dad of a son with type 1 diabetes, and he actually quantified how many times his son went to the school nurse to deal with diabetes. And in 4th grade, with 4 open APS, they went 420 times a year. That's a lot of time away from peers, time away from learning, and just a lot of diabetes work, right? And that's just during the school day. But after his son started on open APS in 6th grade, 5 visits to the school nurse. And that's just one example of one impact of quality of life. So how do these systems work? Well, there's an algorithm, which if you're a non-computer person like me might sound intimidating, but I have to tell you, y'all all already know the algorithm that any closed-loop system does. Do you know what it is? If your blood sugar is rising and expected to be high, you're going to give more insulin. If your blood sugar is predicted to be low, below your target, you're going to reduce the amount of insulin. That might be with a low temporary basal rate, might be with suspension, or you might decide to eat food. So what this closed-loop system does is it takes the information from your CGM, it takes the information from your pump, and it graphs it into the future. And so it says, when are you predicted to be above or below target? And depending on when that window is, it might decide to give you 0 insulin for safety because it doesn't want to add and contribute to a potential hypo. And so it might help correct if you over-bolus or double-bolus for your meal. And vice versa, if you didn't bolus enough for lunch, or your blood sugar started rising from whatever reason, sickness, stress, excitement, it might say that more insulin is needed. And the way these systems are designed is so you don't have to guess. At any moment, you can glance down at your watch, your phone, log into the system and say, why are you doing what you're doing? And the system will say, well, based on this amount of carbs, this amount of insulin dosing history, this time period, here's exactly what that line looks like. Here's the point that we're most concerned for safety. Therefore, we're giving this much insulin. And that sounds really, really basic, but we have added more advanced features over time. One of them is called autosensitivity that's used in open APS. It looks at the last 8 to 24 hours and says, here's what happened compared to what we predicted all along. And calculate, are you more sensitive or more resistant to your insulin? So weekend or weekday, menstrual cycle, sickness, you just started training for a marathon, you just started working night shift, it doesn't matter why, if you're more sensitive or more resistant, it will calculate that and use that in your closed loop calculations. And the systems are also interoperable, so it doesn't matter if you have an iPhone or an Android, you can have a DIY closed loop system that will allow you to remotely and temporarily set targets. So even if maybe you're targeting 5.5 normally, but you're about to go out for a jog, you can set a target of 6.5 or 7 or 8 millimole or whatever it is that you want to set for, and the system will adjust the dosing accordingly. And it can also alert you if the system can't do enough because your pump site fell out and it can't give you the insulin delivery, you're not responding accordingly to what the insulin and the system thinks will be happening, it can alert you. And one of the tools that we built for closed loop, we've actually found can be really helpful for everybody else as well. And this is a tool called RoTM. And this tool was developed because we had a lot of people come into the closed loop community and say, you know what, I'm getting pretty good results at night, I'm getting okay results in the day, but you know, my graphs aren't quite those flat lines that I'd like to see. And so the conversation always starts with, well, what are your settings and when are the last time you might have changed them? And you'd be surprised how often the answer is 5, 10, 15 years when I first went on a pump, I've been using the same settings. Super common. And it's really hard to hear from another human that your settings are wrong because you're like, no, 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 they're right. It's working for me in manual diabetes mode. And even with lots of experience of working with other people in the community, we realized that we weren't making a lot of progress with that. So we said, can we build a tool that will actually calculate the data for it and show an individual, here's where their data shows that their settings might be off. So that's where RoTM came to be. But it was so helpful right away that we had a lot of demand for people who weren't looping to use it. So in fact, you all can use it today if you've got Night Scout. You can throw your Night Scout URL in RoTM web, so you can see the URL there. And make sure your profile is up to date with what you're doing. But you'll get an email report that says, here's what your basal rates, ISF, and carb should be based on the data. If you're not tracking things in Night Scout, it takes about a week's worth of data. So if you're willing to go back and add boluses, carbs, and temporary basal treatments, you can then throw it in. And if you're not on Night Scout, don't fear, you can set up one really, really easily, throw that data in there as well, and it's been really, really helpful. Now I mentioned advanced features. A lot of people think that all of the DIY systems and the commercial systems are the same. hybrid closed loops, right? You still have to carb count, you still have to meal bolus. Well, for the last almost 2 years, I've not been bolusing for my meals. All I do is eat and let the system decide how much insulin I need to give. Now, I'm personally choosing to do a meal announcement because I get slightly better outcomes with that. But we have plenty of people in the community who are doing no meal announcement, no bolus, no nothing. Somebody in the break was just saying, yeah, there's days where I don't bolus, I don't touch my system at all. That's very, very common in the DIY world. And it doesn't matter what happens. With my DIY closed loop system in the last 4.5 years, I've had the flu and then bronchitis for 3 weeks. My nephew, darling child that he is, gave me norovirus, along with 16 other adults. And I was so worried as the person with type 1 diabetes about being hospitalized. Not a single problem. I didn't have a single low with norovirus, all the lovely symptoms that come with that, not eating for 3 days, not a single low. And it doesn't matter whether I was training for a marathon or being inactive because I fell off a mountain and broke my ankle. The system can handle all of those fluctuations in the short term and the long term. And so that's where we are today. Most people think, again, hybrid closed loop, but we're also, in the DIY world, showing what's possible. We are making steps toward that fully automated closed loop system, where if you've got your pump site on, your CGM well calibrated, the system is running, it can take care of so much of the messes of diabetes. And that's why I get really frustrated anytime somebody says, but you're just a patient. You're not a doctor. You're not an engineer. Who are you to be building a louder alarm? Who are you to be telling people about this closed loop system thing? And so no, as a person with diabetes and a non-engineer, I'm not an engineer or doctor or programmer or rocket scientist, but what most people don't realize is that the day we're diagnosed with diabetes and we're sitting home with that vial of insulin or an insulin pen, we are forced to be engineers and scientists to figure out how to make diabetes work with our life. Every single person in this room has invented solutions and come up with ways to make things work for them and their life with type 1 diabetes. And so when I talk to healthcare providers, I ask them not to fall into the patient syndrome trap, which is kind of like imposter syndrome, which you might be feeling like I am, where I'm in a room with all these incredibly brilliant people. They know way more than I do. Who am I to be in this room, right? Well, in healthcare, I observe a trend in all of healthcare where healthcare providers sometimes act or come across as if they know everything we do. And patients just know a little bit, right? That's why we go to healthcare providers to get their wisdom. But what I've learned is that we patients actually know a lot of things. And yes, healthcare providers know a lot, regulators, government agencies, everybody has a role. But we would go so much more quickly and so much further if we focused on not that little overlap between our knowledge sets, but take the best from the patient in the DIY community, take the best that the healthcare system has to offer, and work together. And that's what we're starting to see, because we realize that traditional healthcare manufacturers, they have to do this. They can't come to market with a wheel if they're planning to sell a car. But we, as patients, know the problem is not that we need a car. The problem is wanting to go from point A to point B and make it a little bit faster, a little less painless. So what do we patients do? Because we don't know how to build a car, right? We're not car manufacturers. But what we do is we look around and say, well, I see some tools that can help me. I see a block of wood and some wheels. I'll make a skateboard because it's better than walking. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, did you know you could add steering to this? And you end up with a scooter, and then an e-scooter, and then a bike, e-bike, car, automated car. And that's where we are with automated insulin delivery as well. We have learned so much too from collaborating with each other, from asking questions, from learning together. We've discovered new things in the DIY community that traditional researchers and medical scientists are now studying and getting a better understanding of how type 1 diabetes even works. Things like when insulin peaks around mealtime, this concept of eating soon mode. There's so many innovations that we've come up with that medical scientists and researchers now say, oh yeah, we didn't know that before, but because of these tools, we're going to be able to figure it out and study it and make it available to more people, which is absolutely wonderful. But I recognize that in the last 5 years, we've had tons of knowledge in the community. Much of it is online. But we also know that there's a gap in accessibility and affordability. We want to address that. So one of the things that I've been working on is thinking about how do we capture all of this information. And so I have a secret to share with you all in the room. If you will agree not to tweet this next slide, the one exception. General agreement? Yeah? Okay. So I have started working on a book about the basics of artificial pancreas delivery to help us as well as the general population of people with diabetes and healthcare providers to kind of understand the differences between manual diabetes and automated insulin delivery. It's not out yet, which is why this is a sort of secret. It'll be out officially in the next 2 weeks. It'll come in a couple formats. You'll be able to buy a physical book if you want. But the Kindle version is available now. The website is available for free. If you want to download it as a PDF, you can. So you're welcome to take a picture as long as you promise not to tweet it yet. But the URL is artificialpancreasbook.com. And the reason I'm sharing this is because, again, if you're wondering where do I go to get started in closed loop after today, this is a good starting point. My goal was to write this in plain language as much as possible to help you understand the differences in automated delivery. DIY or commercial, it absolutely doesn't matter. But really help you adjust to kind of this new thinking and help you decide, is it right for you? APS may not be for everybody, totally fine. But I want people to be informed and educated and being able to make those choices. So that's what I've done here. But I'm going to pause now and let Alistair come up and talk a little bit more about each of the DIY systems. There's actually 3 core systems, and then Tim will follow with a little bit more specific.